guess, is the choice here tonight. Hello, everybody. I'm Skip Reimer. I'm Executive Director of Events and Communications here at the Milken Institute. Welcome to, I guess, what I call our Summer Forum series. Something a little different tonight. Thanks, Mom. No, I'm just kidding. A couple housekeeping items here first. Our next forum will be on Tuesday, August 5th, when Ed Catmull will be here. Ed is the president of Walt Disney Animation Studios and Pixar. He'll be here to talk about his new book, Creativity Incorporated, Overcoming the Unseen Forces That Stand in the Way of True Inspiration. That's August 5th. Since you're all here, I assume you all will get the invitation to that. The only thing we're not clear on is what time that will be. Normally, as you know, our forums are at 4:30. We may have to do that one at 6:30, but just look at your invitation so you don't come here early if that's the case. After tonight's program, Josh will sign copies of his book, and you can buy copies of his book from our friends at Barnes & Noble over in the corner. Thank you very much. He's referring to a little problem that Amazon is having with some authors, so you can go into that after tonight's meeting. We are going to have them talk for about 45 minutes, and we'll open up to questions. Unlike as we normally do, for those of you who've been here before, we're not taking questions electronically tonight. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way with microphones. So we'll hand those out. Just raise your hand, and we'll get the microphone to you. So Kathy is going to introduce Josh, but it's my honor to introduce Kathy, our moderator. Kathy is a writer and journalist and founder of and chairman of the Creative Visions Foundation, a global organization that supports creative activists who use their talents to change the world. But our choice of her as moderator tonight goes much deeper than her many talents. In 1977, Kathy and her husband and their 2 children moved from England to Kenya, where she reveled in what she calls this tumultuous new world. Sadly, in 1993, her 22-year-old son, Dan, a photojournalist on assignment from Reuters, was killed by an angry mob in Somalia, along with 3 of his colleagues. That inspired her to launch her foundation, which has acted as an incubator, academy, and agency for more than 200 projects by artists and activists. It also led to a chance meeting with Josh at a screening of a film about Dan's life. Josh was attending the screening with Mohammed Shafi, is that pronounced correctly? Who was the only survivor in that attack in which Dan was killed, and he was a good friend of both Josh and Kathy. So when I suggested, not knowing any of this, that Kathy interview him tonight, both were thrilled as they had not seen each other in many years until today. Now, the story of Africa, especially of Rwanda, is one, as we know, of incredible sadness. But yet, as the Milken Institute's work in this area shows, and as Josh's book shows, it is also one of great progress and great hope. And we're delighted to be able to have this discussion here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kathy Eldon and Josh Ruxin.
We've been having a lot of fun in the brown green room back there. Yeah, in fact, we didn't even really want to come out here and chat with all of you, but we did it anyway. Actually, just very briefly, because so much is going to come out about Josh. He founded and directs Health Builders, which was formerly the Access Project. It's an initiative of Columbia University that applies business principles to health problems by providing technical management assistance to rural health centers in Rwanda. Today, Josh oversees work in 90 health centers serving over 2 million Rwandans. I'd actually had 86, but in the last month, whatever it was, since they put it up on online, he's got 4 more. So this is pretty good. He didn't want me to tell you, but he graduated from Yale. He has a master's of public health from Columbia, a PhD in history from the University of London. He's currently based in Kigali, Rwanda, where he lives with his wife and 2 daughters and a son. And as I said to him, the reason I know he's smart is not all those sort of academic stuff, but he married a Wellesley woman.
Got that right.
I know he's got good taste anyway. That's where I went. So I actually feel a strong kinship with Josh for many reasons. And you heard about our shared wonderful friend, Mo Shafi. Mo was with Dan and the 3 other guys when they were stoned and beaten to death by a mob in Somalia in 1996. 1993. Mo was the subject of a film that we did called Dying to Tell the Story about journalists at risk. And Mo died of a massive heart attack at the age of 49 as a journalist whose heart was broken by what had happened, and he'd seen too much and given too much. And today, as journalists are facing so much pain around the world and trauma, and the guys in Egypt who were just imprisoned, I just spend one little second thinking about those folks and Mo, who brought us together. It's just a great joy. But I also have a kinship for you because back in 1977, when I was very young, I was about 12. Actually, I had a husband and 2 children, but we won't, whatever. I landed in Nairobi, Kenya. And it was this incredible fertile place, and I was this goofy Iowa, not that young woman who was together with my husband, who was running a computer company. He was 30, running a computer company in Kenya. And I landed there full of desire to do something, and I couldn't get work permits, and it was all very challenging, and I know you went through that. But I learned very early on that in Kenya, you wrote about it, you can put a stick in the ground and it will grow. Now, what they don't tell you is that chances are it will grow some nasty black fungus very rapidly. It will probably be hacked by somebody with a machete who wants to make a toothbrush, or it will be trampled by an elephant, or it will wither in a drought. I mean, one of those things is bound to happen before that little stick. But the cool thing is you can plant another stick and it will grow. And this time you could probably ask a local where to plant the stick. You could ask the local how to build a thorn fence around it so maybe it could survive whatever, and how to keep the elephants away. This character here arrived in Rwanda and planted a lot of sticks. And he's going to tell us today how you actually did that. Josh, I would love it, because we want you to buy this book. It's really hard writing books, and he's done a really good book. So I want him to read this first passage, which it resonated with me so much because it's the story of me when I was landing. So please read. Then you can buy my book too. But
Thanks so much, Kathy. Our plane drifts up over the Atlantic at dusk. We watch a film or two, then doze off. The sun comes up as we float down to Brussels, a cup of coffee there, then we rise over the morning Alps, and then the blue Mediterranean, and finally the torn brown edge of Africa. There's a thick brown haze below, a midday sandstorm in the Sahara. It takes time to cross the Sahara, as it is about the size of the US. Africa is big enough to hold all of the US, including Alaska, plus all of Mexico, all of China, India, France, Spain, Germany, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the UK. Even then, you'd have enough land left over for 2 states of Texas, but Africa has enough trouble. When economists describe Africa as the next China or the next New World, you have to keep in mind how impossibly big it is, but also how filled it is with energetic, ambitious young people and unmeasured resources. It is too violent, yes, but so is North America once. And I'm actually always reminded whenever I recount that trip, that journey, which these days to this coast takes about 30 hours. Our daughter, Maya, when asked recently, how do you feel about your annual visit back to the States? Maya responded, she's just turning 7 this September. Well, I mean, the trip for us and Eli, who's 2.5, and Elodie, who's 5, it's very easy. But for Mom and Dad, it's a tough trip. We need to break things up. So that said, I will make a very strong pitch for everyone here, and a few of you have actually come out to Rwanda to come see Rwanda, or come see Rwanda again, because it is such an incredible pearl right in the center of the continent.
It's a pearl, but it's a pearl that has 1 or 2 blemishes. And I think that when we think Rwanda, the first thing we all think of is Hotel Rwanda, which is, sort of embedded in our psyches. So you landed in a Rwanda that was 10 years away from the worst genocide since World War II, right?
And one of our connections, actually, which we just talked about in the brown-green room, is actually that Battle of Mogadishu, which followed your terrible personal tragedy. of course, was the prelude to US lack of involvement during the 100 days of the Rwandan genocide. So we have all of that in common. And of course, 1994 was not just the year of the genocide, but also the rise of Mandela.
Yeah.
So there was all sorts of both hope and misery happening at just that time. And when Alissa and I moved to Rwanda, just about 10 years out from the genocide, she too had just been informed by what she had read, what she had heard, and was amazed to find this country that was literally being reborn. And the best part about living there for the past 10 years is that we really do feel as though we are part of this country that is growing up and coming to its own and finding its own footing. It's been the subject of some criticism, and unfortunately not the subject of the praise that I think that it deserves, because the achievements have been stunning.
So you're reminding me of when we landed in Kenya. It was 1977.
Oh, actually, we should put
Yeah,
the slide up.
put
Let's put
the-
up number 4 just to.
Figure out where this country is.
Yeah,
But
where
when
are
we
we?
landed, it was nation building time. Jomo Kenyatta had just, was in his prime, and it was the most exciting concept for me to think that you don't ask permission, you don't get permits, you just go. It's actually the basis for what I do now, which is called creative activism. You are a perfect example of a creative activist. But for you, it must have been, or for Alissa, when you moved into that house, and there's a description in here, but maybe you can share. It wasn't all rosy. I mean, the ghosts were there. What happened?
Yeah, so very early on when we moved into our first home in Kigali, we had a knock at the door one morning. We wondered who had come and invited a woman in with a couple others. They said that they wanted to discuss something with us. And what they wanted to discuss was that her brother's body was buried in our backyard during the genocide. He'd been murdered very close by, and during Gacaca, which was the community court process, which tried nearly 250,000 people, it had been revealed where he had been buried. And so she was coming to ask permission that a couple Saturdays later, whether the whole family could come together and dig up the remains of her brother. And that wasn't the only ghost. It was actually in the course of writing the book that I started asking more questions, and questions of my incredible neighbor, of whom I write, Pier Antonio Costa, who's really an unheralded international hero. He literally bought thousands of lives during the course of the genocide, Schindler style. And I went to Pier Antonio and asked him what had happened in our house, because I noticed that all of our door frames, you could tell they had been kicked in. All of the locks had been broken. And he reported to me that a family had been murdered actually in our house. So this was sort of our introduction initially to Rwanda. These ghosts were very much there, and we could see it in the scars and the look of people in the streets. But over the last decade, we've actually seen an incredible transformation from that deep sadness and lack of optimism about the future to a country that now is one of the fastest growing, a decade in a row, ranked consistently as one of the best places in the world to do business. And it's led us to go from moving there for 2 years, 10 years ago, to still being there and really laying down even deeper roots in Rwanda.
But now this whole thing, I think you were actually humbly, you're not confessing, but you've been a strong part of this this development. And I'd like you to project yourself back. You're landing in Rwanda. You have hopes and dreams. Now, where did this whole thing come from? There's this name Jeffrey Sachs, ring a bell. I mean, how did that, where does he come into this?
Well, I had, as a teenager, actually, I was first interested in hunger issues. My first time touching down in Kenya was 1987, and that was when I met Mo Shafi. And so my heart had always been in Africa one way or another. My first interest was spurred by the Ethiopian famine of 1984-85. And I've sort of been spending my whole life ever since then trying to figure out what to do, how to make a meaningful contribution. And after taking management consulting for a spin for several years and thinking about ways to increase prosperity in poor countries, Jeff Sachs called me up at one point and said, hey, it's time for you to really get engaged in the war on poverty. And so he has been just a tremendous colleague in helping to push this work forward.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I know when you landed, it was really tricky because white man, and this is really awkward. The white man comes, you got all these solutions. It's it's not the way to turn up. And you've been very specific about that in the book of how not to create a sustainable business. What did you do in order to endear yourself or make them respect you sufficiently to feel that you were appropriate to work with the Rwandan government on this?
I think the most important thing that we did was we really turned to Rwandan leaders and Rwandan partners to guide the vision. In all the work that we do on the ground, we do it with the government of Rwanda. We rely on them for co-investment and ultimately for the sustainability of it. I just got some great news this past week that a couple foundations are funding one of our latest health centers with the government of Rwanda. And what's different about what we do from most international NGOs is we'll build a health center. Actually, I've got a picture, I think, of one of them. On the map, you can actually see several of the ones that we built from scratch. Somewhere, number 10, please. So those health centers, which are about 10,000 square feet, the day they open their doors, our team, which is completely Rwandan now, so we've actually transitioned over the years. We started off with expat teams, and now actually we bring in the expats to learn from the Rwandans. When the doors open to those health facilities, they are run, managed, staffed, paid for by government of Rwanda and by the communities. So our donors never spend another dollar from the day that those facilities actually open. 90 kids get born actually at that particular facility every single month. Immunization rates are through the roof, nearly 100%. And it really becomes the centerpiece of the community. And I just haven't found, I'd love to find another country where you could do that. Everybody says, Josh, can you replicate this somewhere else? Can you scale it? I can't, because Rwanda is exceptional.
Oh, darn it. That's so annoying. I just want to go backtrack here because on the Jeffrey Sachs, the Millennium Village, it's a little tricky to find you all. There are a lot of projects. I think you've been probably the most successful of the experiments and the projects, phenomenally successful. But here's the deal: the place where you went, Mayange.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read what he faced. The area suffers from sporadic rainfall, declining soil fertility, endemic poverty, illness, lack of economic opportunity. Unlike most of rural Rwanda, it has a couple of settlements, closely spaced dwellings, which the government built to house returnees from the genocide. Nyamata Church, and you all know that tragic place where 2 mass graves hold the remains of 40,000 genocide victims, is contained within the village cluster. So when this project started, 1 in 5 children died before the age of 5, and the only health center serving the 4 villages had no running water, electricity, or medicine. So, what he's talking about is absurd. The success.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to go from that, where you arrived, to getting something up and running and that worked?
I think the big change and the big turning point, if you turn to slide number 19, that's Jacqueline. She's a woman who's been very successful in business and actually growing pineapples in Mayange. She was also very angry with me and the team early in the project. We had opened up a health center. The health center had actually been locked, and you had to go find a nurse to come for a delivery or for any type of illness. And we opened it up. We started treating malaria. We started treating HIV/AIDS. And about 9 months in, that was really the first big intervention. We had some agriculture interventions as well. At that point, Jacqueline came up to me in a public meeting. She said, I'm really mad at you. I used to be the funeral director here in Mayange, and I got paid really well, but we haven't had a funeral in over 6 months. and that was the turning point, and that was what reassured me. Oh yeah, there was a reason that I do public health for a living, because that's where it all starts. And as long as a community faces tragedy on a daily basis in families, among kids and moms, and even the elderly as well, it can't move forward. But that was the moment that we knew that we were really succeeding. And the community, as you pointed out, had been chosen by the government of Rwanda because the government said, we don't know what to do there. This was the epicenter of the genocide itself, and we've thrown everything that we can at it. Why don't you give it a shot with your team? So from health, we started work on agricultural interventions, and while we were doing that, government really stepped in. They built a road from Kigali out there. They started investing in education in the primary schools and secondary schools there. They started investing in electricity and potable water. And today, the community is one of probably the most prosperous in the country outside of Kigali. So it's literally gone from famine. I had photos in here. I don't know if they come out. 21 actually is what it looked like early on. It was a desert. So if you put on slide 21, you can actually see this. This is very sophisticated here. So 21 is what it looked like. Number 9 is what the first ambulance was in Mayange at the time that we started our work, to number 8, which was actually the first successful harvest. And as soon as that harvest happened, frankly, between what the government was doing and what our teams were doing, there wasn't a lot more to do. Development took off. The private sector moved in. Businesses started springing up. People opened up little home theaters, little cinemas as soon as the electricity arrived and started charging admission. It was just amazing to see that the private sector forces that were there were unleashed as soon as the basics were done.
You talked about security, I think, in the book, that the need that we all have for security, peace, but also for feeling secure physically. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to Mr. Obama, President Obama, and see if we can get this sort of thing going here in this country.
Well,
this health care is
Rwanda got ahead of the 8 ball when it came to national health insurance.
Yeah.
The national health insurance enrollment rates are higher than they are in the U.S. Doesn't mean that everything is perfect. It doesn't mean that it's the best place to get treated for any variety of diseases, but it does mean that the national vision is a recognition that it all starts with health, and that you cannot have catastrophe befalling a family and expect economic progress to somehow follow.
I think that's an incredibly enlightened perspective, and we don't have that in this country yet. We don't understand that.
We're definitely not there yet.
Yeah, this is really, I think, one of the biggest lessons from this.
Right.
Rwanda is such a different place from my experience in East Africa and Kenya, which has had a long history of corruption and just really unfortunate discrepancy of wealth and allocation of money, and it's difficult. It has a democracy, but it's very flawed.
It's a kleptocracy. It's a democratic kleptocracy.
I think you put the finger on it. You talk about kleptocracy. Could you just read page 155? That's a section I really like. Actually, I like every page, but just choose that page. In the sense that we all kind of benignly allow stuff to go on. And it's not, believe me, it's not just in Africa that stuff goes on. We all look at corruption down the road in California. But read that.
Every time corrupt leaders travel to the West, students and human rights organizations should greet them with great protests. This is simply not a practice today. They mostly get a free pass. Why aren't there protests outside of the consulates of nations that have the wealth needed for public health but choose instead to let their mothers and children die? There are good websites that rank these kleptocracies by degrees of thievery. Transparency.org is one of my favorites. So organizing against them should be easy. The most corrupt 15% of nations, 25 countries more or less, should be on the foreign aid blacklist, except, as I said, for dire emergencies. Otherwise, let's encourage the corrupt rulers to build their own roads and health clinics and schools and water systems. It's crazy that we've enabled so much corruption for so long.
What do you think about the World? Yeah, here. I'm right there. What about the World Bank?
Long way to go. Good leadership at the top, but I think the bureaucracy itself, I'm not sure, is designed for the change that's really required. And I think that, that all comes from a meaningful place. I originally got into development because I had seen the horrors of poverty when I was just a teenager, and I wanted to do something about it. But it takes a lot more than being passionate and having your heart in it. It's about actually having your brains in it and being strategic about it. And that's really what I learned from my wife. And the title of the book takes its name from the restaurant that my wife built. So my wife actually is, in addition to being a Wellesley graduate, she's a Harvard graduate in public health. And when she joined me in Rwanda, we figured she's going to work in public health. But actually what she saw working with the survivors of the genocide in particular was what they most needed were jobs. And the government of Rwanda said, we're transparent, you can set up business here. And my wife said, really? And 24 hours later, she had her business certificate, she was incorporated, and Heaven, the idea, which I thought was just going to be a bunch of plastic chairs and a little cafe, actually, began to take form. And so Alissa actually took the reins on this. So she was actually pregnant with our first child. She ended up building, let's turn to slide 3. She ended up building this restaurant as a social enterprise to create a place that would actually raise the standards of hospitality and give tourists to Rwanda something more to talk about than just the fabulous gorillas, which are a great reason, by the way, to come and visit Rwanda. But now they talk about the food and they talk about the experience at Heaven Restaurant.
And this is another point of connection. I actually was called the Iron Stomach when I lived in Kenya. I did. It was very hard for me to find any kind of job at all. And eventually I managed to talk the editor of the Nation newspaper to letting me start a cookery column, because I was a woman and I could sometimes cook, although my husband's in the audience and he knows that's really not true. But I did a cookery column, and then I did an eating out column, and I ended up doing 3 cookbooks. I just gave him one of my cookbooks. Thank you very much. Yes, you can get that online. But that was done in Kenya. And then I did 3 the eating out books. The last one I did had 365 restaurants. So I literally crisscrossed the country, mostly samosa stands, really places you could get termites sometimes, intestines. It was all very exciting. So I am...
We don't serve those at Heaven yet.
Well, my dear, they're crunchy, they're delicious. But I cannot wait to come to Heaven. And I just love the fact that it is called Heaven. Now, that was not an easy thing to do, because not everybody knew how to cook. None of your people had ever been to a restaurant, a Western restaurant, virtually. So how did she do this?
Well, it's still a work in progress. I always think about, I think it's the French Laundry, where at the end of every night, the maitre d' and the chef and the head of service sort of rate themselves 1 to 10, and they've never gotten a 30, even though it's one of the great restaurants. And we've never been a 30, but we get really close, and that's always what we're trying for. That Michelin star is out there for us someday. But indeed, Alissa initially took on these incredibly vulnerable kids who had never worked before, had never eaten in a restaurant, and started to teach them. And actually, slide 6, one of our first chefs in the restaurant, the guy on the right, Joel, who's still with us, an extraordinary story of survival from the genocide, which is actually told in the book, also had to learn that not everyone wants to eat Belgian-style food, because not only did the Belgians leave horrible historical references to ethnicity behind, which actually helped to lay the groundwork for the genocide, they also did not leave behind very good cuisine. So
travesty.
Horrible. So we've been working ever since to really up the level of cuisine and get Rwandans and to get also tourists, of course, to expect something of a higher caliber in Rwanda. And the result is that everyone who works at Heaven gets paid much, much more, multiples more than they would get paid anywhere else. They're putting themselves through university. Our current sous chef, who actually was initially the steward, is Solange. I think there's a shot of Solange, 27. She's actually in that photo too, with one of our chefs. Solange had never had a job before. She was working in the restaurant just as a cleaner. And Alissa one day discovered that in addition to cleaning, she was cooking staff meal. Alissa wondered, what are you doing cooking staff meal? And all the cooks said, well, everybody knows Solange is the best cook. So she has actually worked now under Michelin-starred chefs She makes one of the best risottos you've ever tasted and is these days working under another new fabulous chef. But in addition to doing all that, she's making enough money to put herself through university. She wants to open her own restaurant someday. She's supporting all of her siblings through private school, her family, her grandparents, and everyone. So really, I think one of the big lessons from this, and the reason that I really wrote the book was, yes, I've spent most of my life working on poverty alleviation, working on public health, and trying to bring these private sector principles to public health. But what I've really learned from my wife and her work at Heaven was that investing directly into the private sector is perhaps just as powerful, if not a more powerful means of causing incredible social impact. Because of the dozens of people who are employed at Heaven, they are supporting hundreds of others. There's even a farmer's market that now comes every weekend to Heaven. There's cultural events and activities that happen there. So there are thousands of people who are not the recipients of any aid package. Alissa and I financed this with our own funds that actually we didn't have. It was the bank's funds. It was a mortgage on our apartment in New York, and then friends and family. But we actually turned the corner, and it's a profitable business. And everyone who's working there is working there because they love it, because it's supporting them, and because they're learning. And they're learning exactly the types of skills that are needed for them to help end poverty.
This is really very subversive stuff you're saying here. I'm not sure the IMF is going to like it. I'm not sure the UN, and certainly World Bank. I don't think this is not going to support the folks back home who are normally benefiting from the aid packages a little bit more than the folks over there. Isn't that, I mean, how do people greet you when you go to those places, or you don't go?
They don't like me very much.
They don't like you. I don't think so.
Frankly, they don't. I mean, the conventional wisdom, if you're not a doctor, if you're not a nurse, or if you're not some development wonk, then you don't have anything to offer poor people. But my view is, first of all, everyone has something to offer the poor in developing countries. Come on over as a tourist. Go to restaurants like Heaven. That's a great way to support people and to help to lift people out of poverty. Provide constant feedback, help them do their jobs better, help them produce better food, help them produce better hotels, better services. Those are magical answers that actually are not all that magical, which, by the way, don't really get any support by our government funds. They don't get support from the multilaterals. There's really very little funding out there for these entrepreneurial initiatives. And I'm reminded, one of our good friends and Health Builder's first executive director, a guy named Blaise Karibushi, walked into Heaven the first night, hugs Alissa, and says, "Oh, we don't even need development assistance anymore. We need 1,000 Heavens."
That's right. Interestingly, I run this place called Creative Visions, and it's halfway between Santa Monica and Malibu, above American Apparel, and I'm inviting him to come tomorrow and all of you to stop in. But today we had a really wonderful woman who came, and she's running she started a community center in Kibera, in the worst slum in Kenya. And their exit strategy was they were in and out, in, I don't know, 18 months, something like that. And I said, look, the book you should be writing, because she was talking about fundraising, and I said, what you really need to do now is do the how to create a sustainable business, which you hand over to the folks, which is what you guys are doing. But we don't teach people how to do that, and this is a little toolkit. It's a handbook. It's something that she could write in a month if she had the opportunity to take that time. And I'm wondering whether the next book you could do, this is the kind of grand scale, and it's hard writing a book. I've just done one called In the Heart of Life. This is my slight plug, shameless plug, but mine took 16 years, and we're just comparing notes on how incredibly hard it is to deal with publishers in the world today. This is hard stuff.
Yeah.
But if you could, maybe the next book be that online, it's an app, something that people could download from their cell phone in the bush in Rwanda or in India, but really tell people how to do this. And then forget about here. I mean, this is a good place to be. Milken Institute is a very subversive place to be. It's very good. But the idea of going to the IMF or going to the World Bank or really being able to say what you're saying, it's revolutionary.
It might be revolutionary, but I'm not sure that they'll ever adopt it, because I'm not sure that they're configured to do so. And I think that's why it's up to everyone else to figure out how to make those investments, how to find the organizations that actually have the right approaches.
So, okay, they're just ordinary folk here. They're business people. What can they do? You already said go as a tourist. Now,
Go as a tourist.
I'm going to give you a little challenge here. One of our mutual friends that we just discovered is treasured friend, Jeff Gettleman. And many of you probably today read Jeff Gettleman writing. He's the bureau chief for the New York Times in East Africa. And he's writing about how Kenya now, which is a country of enormous tourism. How many people have been to Kenya? I think, yeah, see, look at that. That's why, yeah, massive tourism. How many people have been to Rwanda? Yay,
Yay.
Okay, cool. Right now, Kenya, there were 26 people killed at the coast 2 days ago. You all read about that. And their tourism is going, I mean, it's over for the moment.
Yeah,
it really is.
for a couple of years.
For a couple of years. This is off point, as it were, but it desperately worries me about Al-Shabaab. Now, we talked a little bit about how Rwanda, the reason that nobody went into Rwanda after Black Hawk Down was because, talk about.
Well, right. I mean, U.S. didn't go into Rwanda, and the international community didn't go in because they didn't think those were lives worth saving. I mean, I'm obviously simplifying it, but essentially that was the determination that was made. Today, I think that Rwanda, to some degree, is shunned because it is a very tightly controlled state. And yet, it is that very same tight control which has enabled the progress that the country's realized. And it's that tight control which in many respects means that it's going to be one of the most stable places for decades to come, while Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, other countries are going to suffer the consequences of porous borders, lack of security, lack of good governance, and corruption in their police forces. So until that situation turns around, I think Rwanda is actually going to be a terrific place for private investment, and it can really reshape itself as it wishes to be as the regional hub in Africa.
So exciting. There's one other point that I want to talk about. The whole concept of forgiveness, which Rwanda, they had a genocide that one person across the street was killing another person. They had the gacaca. You mentioned the gacaca courts, but there was this sense of forgiveness in there. And I just want to throw in a little bonus here. There's a film called Beyond Right or Wrong, which a number of you have probably seen, I know. It's a friend of ours, Leica Singh, has written, directed, produced it. But there's a free screening at the Lemley next Tuesday at 7:30 that we have cards afterwards if you want to see it. But it's based a lot in Rwanda. So anybody here tonight might find it really interesting to do that. So forgiveness, do they really forgive? Do they really?
A lot of people have, and I can't explain it. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a number of friends who lost their entire families who literally have forgiven the killers of their families. And we don't understand exactly how they've done it, but they've found a way to do it. Doesn't mean everyone has. But I think that one of the big differences we saw early on is that everyone under one roof, whether it's a basket weaving cooperative or whether it's Heaven Restaurant, when it comes to working together and realizing economic progress, that can go a long way towards helping to people to overcome history, really. Because at the end of it, everyone wants to have so much to lose that they never want to return to those days. And that's essentially the government of Rwanda's explicit policy, which is if we can build enough wealth here among all Rwandans, if we can build enough roads and enough health centers and enough infrastructure, and everyone gets to be well off enough, then the chances of anything ever happening again will be minimal.
For sure. And speaking about forgiveness, I will say that it took me a really, really long time, and it took me a sort of miraculous intervention. Actually, I'll just tell this story. It's short, but we met at a UN screening of Dying to Tell the Story. And my daughter and I had gone back to Somalia to the place where Dan was killed with Mo Shafi, with his beloved friend. And it was really awful in a way to go there because I knew that's where Dan had been beaten and stoned to death together with 3 other guys, and the Somalis, very nearly came after us, and they were pounding their hands against the walls of our van, and it just was very uncomfortable. And I knew that it was in my best interest to forgive, but I wasn't there yet. and we traveled down to South Africa and met Peter Magubani, who was the anti-apartheid photographer who was tortured and beat. Horrible things happened to him. And Amy said, what about it? Have you forgiven? He said, in my job, I know I have to. And I heard the Desmond Tutu quote, to not forgive is like drinking poison and waiting for your enemy to die, expecting your enemy to die. So I heard all that, but I wasn't there. And we were with Shafi, Mo Shafi. We just left him in the hotel on the way to the United Nations. And it's so weird that you're here. But Amy and I got in a cab to go over there, and I looked in the mirror at the guy, and it's never happened to me before or since, but the guy was Somali. I had a Somali taxi driver driving me to the United Nations for the premiere of this film. And I remember just like, what do I do? And Amy and I kind of looked at each other, and I just burst out. I said, okay, here's what happened, and I told him the whole story, and here's what happened to my son. And we got over to the UN, and the flags were flying around us, and he pulled to a stop, and he turned around, and I didn't know what he was going to say, and I could see that his eyes were filled with tears. And he said, my name is Mohammed, and I know everything that happened to your son. I know exactly what happened. And he said he shouldn't have died, and they shouldn't have died, and they were just trying to help. And there was this big, long pause, and he said, on behalf of all Somalis, I ask your forgiveness. And it was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And there was this kind of rush through me, and it was like, I said, I hate what they did, but I forgive. And I forgive you, the Somalis. And with that, it was like this release of energy. And all that stored up anger and resentment was gone. And I really attribute that sense of release to me being able to do what I'm doing. And maybe that release is enabling these people to come back together and create the economic miracle that you've been such a strong part of, which is an example to the rest of the world.
Right. I mean, I guess the question today is whether the world's ready to forgive itself for what happened in 1994 in Rwanda. Because obviously it's not exactly forgivable, but there's a lot that could be done. And there's a lot of hopefulness, and there's a lot of these sticks in the ground that are growing, but Rwanda needs a lot of help. I mean, this is literally the 20th anniversary of the end of the genocide was July 4th. And was there any news coverage talking about how far Rwanda has come? Was there any coverage talking about the drop in maternal morbidity and mortality, the drop in childhood deaths? No, there was not. If there was any focus whatsoever on Rwanda, it's about journalistic freedom or the critiques about democracy. Everyone's focused on the negative, whereas if you meet one of our servers in heaven, you ask, well, how unfree do you feel? They'll say, well, I can actually walk home at night. I feel safe. I can go to school. I can be stopped by a police officer and not asked for a bribe. I might add, when Alissa started the restaurant, we wondered, I mean, Africa's Africa, right? I mean, we're going to end up having to pay a bribe at some point. We've never paid a bribe. We've never faced corruption. We've never seen it.
Amazing.
And so then one has to ask oneself, why is it not even a greater success story? And part of it is that I think people are still scared. When they hear the word Rwanda, they think this can't possibly be a place to go visit, to invest dollars in, to start up a business. And we're on the other side of the coin where we think it's really hard to start up a business here in the States. We actually think that we did something pretty smart, which was, low barrier to entry and providing services that everybody wants and creating jobs. So it's a different way of thinking about development. It's a different way of thinking about empowering people. And it is going to be the way of the future. I think probably the only country on earth that really understands this is China. Mm-hmm. And that's why China is making these incredible investments. And all over Rwanda and all over East Africa, you see these Chinese business investments. Frankly, the architecture is not nearly as nice as heaven. And that's unfortunate. But they do recognize that unabashed capitalism is a fantastic eradicator of poverty, and they've got hundreds of millions of people in China to show for it.
So maybe democracy is not such a good thing. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't think that I'm saying that. I think what I'm saying is that it's complicated and that we can't necessarily avoid a country like Rwanda because we view it as being overly autocratic. Because if not for its ways, it just would not be where it is today. It might have the road infrastructure of Uganda, where getting from point A to point B, if it's 1 mile, well, it's similar to the experience you all have here in LA. But in Rwanda, nice roads everywhere that you want to go, and it's just extraordinary that even in the public buses there's free Wi-Fi. So it's a country that has these tremendous ambitions of really not just being the best in Africa, but being the Singapore of Africa. So it's really on the way, and I hope that I can convince some of you to come over and see its successes.
Well, you said, I think your conclusion, and now we're going to move to you all, is that there are more dreams than ghosts in Rwanda today, which is such a beautiful phrase.
And we are still dreaming. Heaven Boutique Hotel, lots of other initiatives on the way. If you're interested, come see me after.
We are so coming to Rwanda, Michael. All right, let's hear from you all. This is, I don't want to give him up, but let's, yes.
Well,
sorry, I think we're
first a
gonna-
round
yeah,
of applause.
yeah.
I mean, this has been wonderful. So we haven't done this in a while, so I'm going to review the rules with you. Raise your hand if you have a question. We will bring the mics to you. Do not ask a question, please, if you do not have the microphone, because you won't be recorded. Please ask one question and don't make long statements to allow others a chance to ask questions as well. So with that, you want to start with you?
Thank you. I work at UCLA and I work at the Center for World Health, and we had hosted President Kagame, and we've also hosted Agnes Binigwahu at UCLA on health and human rights. And I was really interested for you to speak to the role of women in actually shaping this new present.
Yeah. So Rwanda actually has, by mandate, the highest percentage of women parliamentarians on the planet. And I think part of this grew actually out of the Rwanda Patriotic Army's resistance and enlistment of women into the military to liberate the country between 1990 and 1994. And so President Kagame, coming out of that, ending the genocide in 1994, recognized women should have as commanding a role as men in our government, or maybe even a greater role. And if you take a look at cabinet and you take a look at parliament, that is the case. So women are leading, but I mean, let's be frank, at the village level, there are still old habits and those die hard, but there are so many models within government and in the business community of women who are really leading the charge in progress. And of course, luckily, I'm married to one of them.
Hi, how are you? And thank you so much for both of you being here and enlightening us on all these things. I'm a huge advocate that the one step that every human being can take is to acknowledge something that happens. And as a great example with the 300 girls that just occurred, that someone did hashtag bring back our girls. It was just acknowledging it that brings it to light and takes away a lot of the fear. So now what's going on with Rwanda, the fact that it's becoming, progressing and doing so well, it's just as important for the world to acknowledge it. So what steps are being taken for that to happen, and to use their own identity? I'm assuming that the identity is very strong, because that would really help in it being so successful in the way that it's being. So what steps are you taking to so that we can all see it and acknowledge it? And
well, the book's the first step to really acknowledge it. I mean, I think when you make your way through it, you'll see the main characters in the book are Rwandans. So my dear friend Donald Ndahiro, who led the Millennium Villages Project, who taught me so much and really led the charge for development in that community. Certainly the government of Rwanda as well. I do as much as I can to try to acknowledge that and draw attention, but unfortunately I do feel as though I hit a brick wall very frequently. That there continues to be this reluctance about acknowledging the good. and acknowledging that progress. But maybe you can help us figure out how to do it better.
Might get a bigger page on the Millennium Village site.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
We'll work on that.
I'll call you.
I just wanted to say I think you're doing obviously enormous, wonderful work, and it's a great story, not just about what you guys are doing, but about what the country's doing. I guess my question is, what are the ongoing internal or external security threats to the country? And is the government or the security forces, are they strong enough to resist it? Or is there something that might undermine the progress that is obviously ongoing in Rwanda?
Well, certainly the biggest issue for Rwanda's stability is Congo. And Eastern Congo continues to be extremely unstable. Just a couple weeks ago, there were attacks across border, and there was one soldier on the other side who's killed. That is a tough one. As many of you know, the génocidaires, some of the key génocidaires in 1994 fled out of Rwanda into Congo, and that created essentially what's been called the Third World War in Eastern Congo, where millions have died as a result, more deaths since World War II. I believe that the Rwandan military is very much in charge. They're incredibly professional. If you take a look at the African Union forces that are spread across the continent, the Rwandan military is consistently given the highest possible marks because they are absolute professionals. And my experience knowing them and working beside them, including in the area of health, is that they're consummate professionals and they're really focused on the future of the nation. And they recognize better than anyone that the nation's security is absolutely vital to its future growth. So I think that the country is going to be extremely stable for years and years to come. You don't really see these internal forces that you can find in other countries like Kenya, for example, that threaten that. The whole country is moving forward.
There. What do you guys think about like Kiva organization, the microloan people?
Well, I mean, microloans are fantastic. I think one of my personal critiques of microloans, and this is not necessarily of Kiva, is that oftentimes the interest rates are so high, 35, 40% is the global average, that it's very hard for the poor who don't necessarily have entrepreneurial instincts or experience to get their heads up over those types of loans. And so there's a little bit of a domino effect where you have people taking on multiple microfinance loans. And my deeper critique, so that doesn't mean that it can't do a lot of good in a whole lot of cases, that there aren't lots of fantastic success stories that come out of it. My deeper critique is we need to look more at businesses such as Heaven, a few $100,000 investment, so way outside the micro status, which can create a lot more employment and really help to fill out the value chain and create consistent ongoing value. And there aren't really funds that are available for that. So I think microfinance, when done well, can be fantastic, especially if there's lots of technical assistance beside it. But I'm not sure that that is really the answer to the problems of poverty. I think it really takes an integrated set of approaches, from making sure that there's healthcare, making sure that there's good education, to making sure that people actually are producing some sort of product that consumers want to purchase.
Hi, I'm Carol Kretschmann, and I run an organization at the United Nations called the Peacemaker Corps. And we have an outpost in Kigali that Katie Kelly is running. And I want to know about the youth, about the education, about any violence. That's really the focus of the Peacemaker Corps. And we selected Kigali because of a lot of things that you said. But what's happening? What is going on the ground?
Well, I mean, I think if you take a look at the youth in particular in Kigali, there's this extraordinary transformation going on. I have a number of friends who are genocide survivors, and I always ask them every April, how are you doing? How are you getting through it? And their response always is, hey, we don't really have time to focus on the genocide. You know, They're working jobs at night. They're putting themselves through university. They're trying to just get a foothold in the economy. And they say, we don't really have time for hatred anymore. So we've moved past it. But when you move outside of Kigali, where really it's subsistence level agriculture, 85% of the country, people are living on less than a couple $100s per capita per year, even though the national average is much higher, you'll hear a different story. It's harder to move on when you're out in the field 3 or 4 hours a day, and the rest of the time you're back at home chatting with your neighbors about what happened in the past. And so that is the ulterior design of the government, which is to create that economic progress to engage people in something other than revisiting the past, getting them really focused on the future.
Hello. I had a question. Given what's happening currently in the United States with the attraction to a society that has more wealth, do you see that that will become a problem for Rwanda, which might be surrounded by countries and people seeking a better life, but burdening Rwanda with the support of those people?
It's such a great question. A lot of people have asked me how I've seen the shift in Rwandan culture over the last 14, 15 years since I started working with the government of Rwanda. I think if you go back to just the years after the genocide, Rwandans were in it for Rwanda. I mean, I had friends who were paid with sacks of rice and cans of oil for many, many months after the genocide, but they all realized we need to pull together for a greater Rwanda. Today, a lot of people are driving around in their Porsche Cayennes. There isn't a Tesla there yet, but I'm sure coming soon. There are mansions springing up all over the place, which actually is really good for the building sector, good for job creation. And so that culture has shifted. So I think it's more about individuals and their families and moving forward. And I think regionally, people take a look at Rwanda and think, wow, this is a really attractive place to invest money, to build a house. It's going to be a stable place. I think that that's all overall good, but I don't want to paint something that's utopic. There are still hundreds of thousands who are in need of immediate access to primary health care. There are still so many areas in health and in education which require improvement and require investment. Rwanda still has a very, very long way to go. And so while it deserves to be the darling, it also deserves our investment and our smarts and our innovations in order to ultimately succeed at the level that it wants to succeed.
Josh, thank you so much for having written such a magnificent and inspiring book. Every page was a gem. And thank you as well for having recently met with colleagues of mine from Jewish World Watch on their trip to Congo to witness our on-the-ground partners and to provide them with your volcano of valuable information. We hope and pray that the genocides that are ongoing in Sudan and Congo will dissipate and that we will be looking at solutions such as those you've rendered in Rwanda. But my question or suggestion is that your next book or your next article address the constituency before you, that of potential investors who are socially conscious, who want to contribute to sustainable solutions, because there is just such a paucity of resources that we can turn to help folks like you.
Right. Thank you so much for that, and I really did enjoy meeting with your organization, of course, over dinner at Heaven. They were big spenders, by the way. And not the biggest drinkers, if I recall correctly. But I think that, I mean, in a way, I've tried to lay the groundwork for what those investments can look like. And I don't want to be overly prescriptive because I think that there's so many ways to invest in the region and invest in that stability. I mean, when I take a look at Eastern Congo and Congo in general, the investments that can happen in health just haven't yet. Part of it's a question of stability, but part of it's a question, and part of it, of course, is a problem of lack of government in Congo, but part of it also is that I think that too often those who want to have impact look for quick fixes. And as we've learned, especially with the restaurant now in its 6th year, you can't expect to see change happen overnight. You actually have to get in for the long haul. And this is something that I tell our organization's donors. It's that you could give us some funding for 6 months or for a year, but what we really need is 5 years, 10 years of runway, because that's what it takes to have dramatic impact. So I think the way in which we need to sort of x-ray investors and donors' minds and change it up is to say, don't think that you're going to change it all with the touch of a button. Don't think that you're going to change it all with some technological innovation. And there are a lot of foundations and organizations that think that's it, we've discovered it, we found the solution. There is no easy solution. Part of development is about going through great challenges in order to realize these tremendous successes and ultimately great prosperity. But it's got to start somewhere. So, I mean, one of the things that I shared with your group was, let's think about some lessons of the Rwandan healthcare system for Congo. Let's start figuring out how to share that knowledge in Congo. Very similar culture, obviously similar region, some differences obviously in government, which are quite dramatic, but the opportunities are there. Thank you.
Hi. I've journeyed through the same thing in investment banking, and the huge funds under management by the nonprofits. And I've been working with the crowdfunding programs, and I think you might recollect of a year or two back, in a very short period of time, there was about 22 or 26 million raised for a group that was looking to track down the Lord's Army chief.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was, so there's many of us that would love to support causes that are directly attributable to the resources that we bring to play. And money is the easy thing on a global scale. And I was wondering, Kathy, I think, has some exposure to that.
I'm sorry, specifically, sorry.
The Lord's Army and the money raised
Lord's
for that
Resistance Army.
through crowdfunding.
Yeah, actually, Jason Russell, who was the young man who actually was inspired by Dan to start to go off to Uganda initially, and started Invisible Children. But yeah, he used the power of media, which is what we do, to try to create awareness of that issue. And yes, I think they raised a lot of money, didn't they? Yeah, and they've made tremendous progress in getting the Obama administration to send advisors in. But yeah, I mean, as you say, there is tremendous money out there. What you were just saying really touched me as a person running a foundation. That sense that you need that runway, and we spend all of our lives raising money. It's pretty devastating. You're inspiring me as we speak here today. Yeah. What else?
We're going to take one more question right here.
It seems to me that the crux of this success is really the leadership. And it's astonishing to me that they're strong and patient and determined and respected. And I'm just wondering how much outside help was contributed, how many other leaders, or was it endemic in the country? Because this is, I think, the basis for the success, besides a million other things, including you.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. I think that it does start with leadership, and I think that that is probably the best explanation for the success that Rwanda's experienced. And you see it not just at the very top levels of government, but an untold story is that Rwanda has decentralized decision rights. And so there are 30 districts in the country. There are mayors who are held responsible for their community's development. And so that sort of grassroots democratization is really starting up there. And that's one of the most exciting things to witness. But it certainly started at the top. It certainly started with the president sort of laying the foundation, laying the groundwork for the nation's progress, and continuing constantly to push very hard on some core principles, anti-corruption, security and stability being among them, but also attracting private sector investment. And so in lots of ways, we just sort of feel like we're along for the ride. I mean, we placed our bets. We always wanted to live, by the way, I should show you my, my wonderful family while I'm just up here. Where do we have my family? You know, we felt 17, there they are. You know, we felt as though working in Rwanda under these incredible leaders was not about sacrifice. It was not about just doing something that we felt good about or passionate about. And we do face tremendous struggles on a daily basis. And there's lots of anxiety, and there's lots of challenges that our friends back in the States don't ever have to face. And yet, the overall experience that we've had is one of tremendous enrichment, where we feel as though we've been granted this incredible window on how development can happen, how it can be done well. And so just to be a part of that national story feels like a great honor and a privilege for us.
You will be touched forever, and I remain touched by Kenya forever. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. You've written a wonderful book, and it is for sale right over here. He will stay behind to sign copies. Kathy, thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation. Greatly appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Skip.
And thank you for coming.
Fun.